Hi and welcome everyone. I'm Liam O'Brien. I'm the Commercial Director here at Vantage Point. Welcome to our third and final installment in the ESG Masterclass series. In this masterclass, we're going to turn our attention towards implementation, reporting and compliance, through making all the things we've learned in previous webinars real and starting to look at how we go ahead and actually solve some of the ESG challenges and really get started with ESG. We're joined today by our friends at IA Seminars. IA Seminars offer training enablement. You'll have an introduction to IA Seminars in just a second. But before you do, from a Vantage Point perspective, we're focused on transformation and technology implementation to help offer solutions to big questions such as ESG. Kate, I'll maybe hand over to you to jump into some of the housekeeping points and also your slides.
Sorry, Liam, say that one more time.
Sorry, I said I'll hand over to you to jump into your slides.
Great, wonderful. Good morning, good afternoon. I think, we're all really excited to be here in the third installment of the ESG Masterclass. Just before I introduce myself and go into a brief deck on ESG reporting, I wanted to introduce IA Seminars. For those of you who don't know IA Seminars, we were founded in London some 20 years ago. So we're coming upon a pretty significant anniversary this year. Our team are based in the UK, but we work with an international faculty. They are experienced in international accounting standards and now increasingly in ESG and other sustainability related topics. Traditionally, we've delivered training on international standards, on accounting standards for accounting professionals all over the world. But in recent years, we've seen demand grow for training on ESG reporting and a number of related topics. And so now we're able to offer training to a broader range of business professionals. So while we love accountants, and we always will, we are delighted to be working with a greater number of clients from a wider range of professions. Regardless of topic or profession, our commitment is to look after every customer and focus our service around their needs. As a result, around 50% of our business comes from repeats or referrals cared for by our team. So that's a little bit about IA Seminars. I've introduced myself to you all before, but just briefly, I come at ESG and impact investing advisory after about 16 years of experience in the field. And I've been working in ESG since long before it became part of our common lexicon. ESG first entered my consciousness about 12 years ago when I was working for a Pan-African forestry company, and we started raising money from development financing institutions. And suddenly the context around environmental, social governance, risk, and value creation became an important part of not only how we managed our business and how we mitigated risk and created value for ourselves and our surrounding communities and our staff, but also an important part of the conversation with our investors. And it really revealed to me that this growing tide, which we've continued to see, and this link between business performance, access to capital, and a company's ability to demonstrate strong responsibility performance. So I started my career in development, working in international NGOs in sub-Saharan Africa, and then made the shift over to the private sector about 12 years ago. And then ever since, I've been working in this world. I was with a portfolio company in East Africa for 5 years, and then I started a consulting firm and have been working in ESG consulting, mainly for clients in sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, the Middle East, and then more and more in the last few years in North America as well. So to start off today, we're going to initiate the first polling question. So just to get a read of the room, what is the current status of your company's ESG reporting? Please just choose one. Starting from, my company does not do ESG reporting. My company has done 1 or 2 ESG reports. My company completes an annual ESG report. My company completes an annual ESG report and releases the report publicly. Or my company completes an annual ESG report, releases the report publicly, and gains assurance on our ESG reporting from a third-party assurer. So these are just kind of staged levels of progression and maturity around ESG reporting, and just keen to see who we have in the room and what kind of experiences you all are having and what kind of ESG reporting you're familiar with. So if you could get your answers in, and I will ask James for the results in about 3 seconds. Okay, so it looks like, yeah, most of the people on the call are not doing ESG reporting yet, which is a great time to be on a webinar like this. And it's a great time to start this conversation and start thinking about it. And a few of you are a little further down the line, have done 1 or 2 reports or starting to release your reporting publicly. And it looks like one lone soul has done it all. So this is really helpful. And also this will allow us to gain questions and insights from kind of across the spectrum. So please do actively use that chat box to ask questions or offer observations. And remember, participation in the polling questions is important for CPE credits as well. Okay. So in 15 minutes, it's tough to kind of distill the world of ESG reporting, as you can imagine. This is a big topic. So what I've decided to do is just briefly introduce 3 of the most ubiquitous and widely used ESG reporting frameworks, and then give you kind of a cursory overview of what they ask for, and then the resources available to you online. So it's not, I'm going to kind of touch on all 3 of these, but really I'm going to direct you toward the websites and the resources and tools online to support you. And of course, always reach out to us at IA Seminars and to Vantage Point for additional support and backstopping on all of this. So we'll talk about the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, the Global Reporting Initiative, and the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD. So I've spoken quite a bit about SASB, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, in past webinars. The last webinar, you'll remember, which focused on materiality, was very much around the SASB take on materiality and their approach to establishing that which is germane and material for a company to disclose publicly. But also on the SASB website, there are quite a few tools and kind of assets available for you to guide you in your sustainability reporting and ESG reporting journey. First of which is the standards application guidance. So this is one of those kind of for the user pieces of documentation. It answers the questions around how does my company conform with the SASB standards? What do I do if I need to change something? Or what if the type of data I need to report on is slightly different than the data or the disclosure specifically articulated by SASB? Can I omit or modify metrics? Can I use estimations? Is that okay? Is that allowed? It talks to what if there are differences in the laws or recent changes in the laws since SASB guidance has been released. So all of this kind of information is covered on the SASB site under the standards application guidance. So that's the first in a 4-part series of tools I wanted to direct you toward. The next is the standards themselves. Now, last time, you'll remember that I brought up this box with various different types of ESG issues on the left-hand column, and then across the top of the rows were sectors and industries that you may be interested in. So SASB has done a pretty decent job at breaking down 77 specific industries and articulating that which is likely material or important to disclose in each of those industries. So for example, there's specific guidance for apparel, accessories, and footwear as one example that you can bring up on the SASB site. You can download the guidance on the standard, and there's a kind of a full report available for every industry you could possibly be in. So that will enable you, if you are going to approach ESG reporting from the vantage point of SASB, there's specific guidance on your sector and on your industry that will kind of guide the way and let you know what's most important. The next is an implementation primer. So, this document allows companies who have chosen to integrate SASB standards into their core communication a little bit more guidance on exactly how to do so. So it gives you kind of tips and tricks and things to observe, things to avoid. There is a little bit more tactical guidance on how to actually do your ESG reporting. And then this has come in handy quite a bit. If you want to compare yourself to other companies in your sector, or you want to, before you get going on your ESG report, look at examples of reports issued by other companies, either in your geographical region or in the company or in the year that you are offering your report, or in the sector or industry you're offering your report. You can look that up on the SASB webpage. There's hundreds of thousands of SASB recognized ESG reporting that have been done in alignment with SASB standards. So if that's the path you want to take, please do go online to the SASB website and look at their reporters webpage. You'll be able to kind of filter for the industry you're looking to compare yourself with, the year of reporting, the geographical location, so that you can get a sense for what others in your space and what your peers are looking at doing. Okay, moving swiftly along to polling question number 2. This one is around what your expectations of the ESG reporting process will be. So please just choose one. I expect the most complicated part of ESG reporting will be figuring out what we need to measure, setting up the data capture systems, getting my colleagues on board, authoring the report, meaning explanation and narrative of the data, getting the report assured or audited, or something else altogether. So please select one of these as your expected most complicated part of the ESG reporting process. And I'll give you about 2 more seconds to issue your vote. And let's see. Setting up the data capture systems. Yeah, I would agree. In my experience, that has been the most onerous part. And interestingly, we are joined today by Vantage Point, who specialize in data management, in data architecture, and in the systems that allow you to capture, measure, monitor, and report back on your ESG performance. So this is a really good time to be on this webinar and a good time to be engaging with the Vantage Point team as well. Thank you. So now I'm going to, shifting from SASB over to D, I just wanted to offer a couple of quick pointers around the TCFD reporting process. So the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures is the full sort of rendering of this acronym. And the thinking behind it is that financial markets need clear, comprehensive, high-quality information on the impacts of climate change. This matters to all of our businesses and all of our industries at this point. Climate change represents a financial risk to the global economy. So it's financially material, as we talked about last time. ESG disclosures have everything to do with that which is broadly material to a company, and TCFD focuses on the climate-related risks that are financially material to a company or an industry. This includes the risks and opportunities presented by rising temperatures, climate-related policy, and emerging technologies in our changing world, right? All of these things are impacted by our business practices, but also our businesses are impacted by climate change. And this kind of two-way street in impact and influence is an important one to report on and to capture and to think about and to sort of weave into the DNA of our company. So the Financial Stability Board created the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures to improve and increase reporting of climate-related financial information. So one of the things, to keep in mind is that, like we talked about in the first webinar, most ESG reporting is based on a push or a pull. And I would say climate change reporting, because it's onerous and it's difficult and it requires quite a bit of setting up of data management systems, is often put in place because of investor pressure or investor requirements. We know that to be true. To start out, know your footprint, know your greenhouse gas story. What kind of operation are you running, and in what ways do you emit greenhouse gas in the course of your company operations? And you'll hear us kind of talk to scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3, and that could be its own kind of course in and of itself, but effectively think about the way you report on climate-related disclosures as being direct, indirect, or part of your supply chain. So that has to do with the scope 1, 2, and 3. Critical to your TCFD reporting journey will be getting buy-in from finance and senior executives. A lot of this work is onerous, and one of the things that's really important is to ensure that when you are leading an ESG reporting initiative like the TCFD reports, that you are able to glean the information you require from different teams and different departments in your company or your operation. That only works if you have buy-in from the top. It's like most things. So if you are able to secure support, buy-in, and sort of the social capital and political capital of the senior leaders in your operation, you're going to find that your reporting journey is much less frustrating and much more easy to navigate. But critically, and I say this with all ESG reporting, start where you are. Don't be bogged down by the feeling that you have to provide a perfect report or a report that is, infallible in terms of its measurement and in terms of its disclosure and in terms of its rigor. Start where you are. Capture, monitor, and report on what you can. And the most important thing is getting a strong baseline, right? Because as we know with anything, you can't set realistic goals for the future unless you know exactly where you are today. So really starting with what your footprint is at this moment, and then that will enable you to set targets that are realistic and science-based for the future. Next, I think what's also really interesting about the TCFD reporting framework, and this piece is being absorbed, sidebar, when we talk about the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board, which is right now amalgamating a lot of sort of disparate disclosures and reporting frameworks. The ISSB is using part of the SASB framework and part of the TCFD framework as it creates what it's going to do. So I think, all of us would be wise to pay attention to what SASB is already doing and what TCFD is already doing as far as their guidance, because this guidance is also going to be filtering into the ISSB standards in the future, which arguably will be what we are all using and referring to in the coming years. So interestingly, this piece of governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets is one of the pieces being taken by the ISSB as a way of managing disclosures when you're doing your reporting. So just what does that mean? In terms of governance, the idea with TCFD reporting is that you disclose the organization's governance around climate-related risks and opportunities specifically. Right? Who's in charge? Who's end responsible? How are you managing that flow of information within your organization? Strategy has to do with a company disclosing the actual and potential impacts of climate-related risks and opportunities on the organization's business, strategy, and financial planning where such information is material. So this has to do with how your company's strategy and how your company's long-term view is going to be influenced by climate change, right? We often think about how we as companies are influencing the climate, but it goes the other direction as well. And it's important to think through that. Risk management has to do with disclosing how the organization identifies, assesses, and manages climate-related risks. If climate-related risks aren't on your top 10 in terms of your risk register as a company, I would ask some serious questions. It's an important part of how you think about risk as a company, and certainly going forward as a species that is actively destroying our host, we all have to think about the ways that our companies are interacting with and being affected by climate change. Finally, metrics and targets relate to disclosing the metrics and targets used to assess and manage relevant climate-related risks and opportunities where such information is material. So how are you measuring this information? How are you measuring the ways that your company is impacted by climate change, and vice versa? How are you measuring the output into the atmosphere that your company is responsible for? So again, a lot of this is somewhat repetitive, but have an inventory of your greenhouse gas emissions across the organization, set targets that are related to what you're doing now, set realistic, fair targets, but importantly have seen your executive buy-in. But I think the most important thing, and I'll keep kind of underscoring this, is that progress is more important than perfection. Knowing where you are, setting realistic science-based targets, and making annual progress toward those targets in a way that is empirical and clear to your audience is the most important thing. So don't don't get the sense that you have to start perfect or that you have to begin this process in a way that is 100% informed, because as we all know, a lot of this information is transforming over time. So the best skills that we can cultivate are the skills to learn how to do this work and how to think about this work and how to shift and pivot as new information and new tools become available to us. Okay, jumping into polling question number 3. We will bring up those questions, and I want to know about, at this point, the interaction between ESG reporting and financial reporting. So how is your company structuring your ESG reporting with respect to your financial reporting? Our ESG, answer 1 is our ESG and financial reporting is fully integrated. This is great. We offer our ESG and financial reporting in the same document, but they are not integrated. And then we do not coordinate ESG reporting with financial reporting. This is an important question because the future of this work is going to involve very much an integration of all of these kinds of data. And I'm just keen to know where we are now. Certainly for the participants on this webinar, where are you in your journey to integrate ESG and financial reporting, if at all? So I'll give you a few more seconds to issue your votes. And let's see what the results are. All right, so the majority of people do not coordinate ESG reporting with financial reporting, and that's fine. I think that that's very common, and it's very typical of what we hear when we're offering up this information and running these trainings. And I would say to you that that's a really good place to start thinking about the way your organization is going to change, or the way that your information and your disclosure of information to your stakeholders will evolve into the future. Finally, and this is the last slide before we break off into our panel, is the Global Reporting Initiative. The key thing I want to share with you about GRI and how it's organizing its information, and it's evolved over the years. You know, when I started working with GRI to do annual sustainability reporting, it was the G3 framework, and that allowed you to select indicators, and then you got a grade depending on how many disclosures and indicators you released to the public. So you could get an A or an A- or a B, and it would kind of run down the line. In around 2015, 2016, GRI evolved that thinking and replaced the G3 framework with the G4 framework, which involved choosing your indicators based on that which is material to your company. So you could be either a core or a comprehensive reporter. And a comprehensive reporter is a reporter that basically reported on all of the key indicators across the board. And a core reporter was thinking from, you know, the vantage point of materiality, what is the most material indicators and disclosures to our company, and we will report on those specifically. And that's what we elected to do when I was first getting busy with this. But what's important for you all to take away in the GRI makeup, and again, all of these tools and these documents specifically are on the GRI website. They're free to download, widely accessible, is that it's organized in a modular format, which is kind of nice because you can take one of these reports out, digest it, report on it, and then put it aside and work with the next module. When you're doing GRI reporting, there are a set of universal standards that everyone must abide by. So this is kind of the requirements around using the principles, disclosures, also disclosures around the reporting organization. So it's not just indicators that you choose to capture, it's also indicators about your company as it is today. And then it also kind of helps guide you through the materiality assessment process. Then it offers you a set of sector standards that are specific to your sector. And again, it's pretty comprehensive as far as the sector is covered there. And then topic standards for different sectors, depending on that which is material to your company. So, you know, all of this again is widely available, but if you ever have questions around how to navigate the GRI standards, we offer courses on GRI. I know Vantage Point also has worked with this tool as well as others. So you're in good company as far as seeking out support and guidance on all of this. So that's just a very brief primer on SASB, TCFD, and GRI as far as using these tools for your ESG reporting. And now I am going to invite my co-panelists along, And I believe Liam has some strong questions to get us started. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Kate. Yes, so thanks for all the questions that are coming in. Please keep them coming. Maybe to pick up on one theme though, and Matt, this one will probably be for you, I think, to kick off. Obviously, the data question is one that we've highlighted there, especially from a data capture perspective, as challenging, and sometimes I guess people are a little bit confused as to, getting all the knowledge, and people like Kate are brilliant to give you all of the knowledge about frameworks and about ESG more broadly. But when it comes to actually, capturing the data, understanding where data sits, and understanding how your organization looks at the data question, where do you recommend people start?
So I think, and it kind of fits in with one of what I think was the final question that was asked: how well connected is financial reporting and ESG reporting? For me, I think the first question, and often a question that I think is missed, is what is the current IT data and reporting strategy in the organization, and where does ESG fit into it? And I think that's a good starting point to understand, to ensure that as an initiative, ESG doesn't kind of run away on its own and produce some kind of approach or ecosystem that's not connected to the rest of what the organization does. So I think, yeah, step number one is, before you go anywhere, take a bit of a look around, understand what is the broader reporting strategy, because this needs, or should, in my opinion, be as connected to that as possible. And then I guess from there, it's right, well, what comes next? But for me, the starting point has to be alignment with the rest of the organization.
Fantastic. Okay. And maybe just one follow-up question to that. For the people here, what do you think are some of the key elements that maybe we need to do to organizationally align? Because I appreciate we say that a lot, and we're talking about getting a really good view of the current state and how data is interacted with and engaged with today. Maybe just beyond that, how do you drive alignment with a broad and very diverse stakeholder group that you're going to come up against when it comes to ESG?
I mean, I'll maybe start off, and then Kate, Rob, feel free to chip in. But I think I liked the visual that Kate had at the bottom left of one of the slides, which was, I think, governance, strategy, risk management. It really has to flow all the way through the organization. It has to be embodied as part of the ethos of the organization. In terms of what that means from a starting point, often education and training is what needs to come first, to ensure that everyone across the organization understands and knows what ESG is, what it means for the organization. And then I think from there, it's about taking every stakeholder group on a journey. ESG should be seen and treated, in my eyes, as a project. And the first thing you do at the start of any project is think about who's going to be impacted, who's interested in what, who are my stakeholders, what's my communication strategy over the next 12 months as we really tackle ESG. And I think if you take that project mindset, even to the point of building a project team and having a focal point in the organization responsible for driving that forwards, it starts to drive the right behaviors. And as you said, to answer your question, Liam, make sure that everyone understands, everyone's bought in for that journey.
Excellent. Maybe Kate, Rob, it'd be good to hear from you as well on that point around getting that diverse stakeholder group bought into the change that they're about to go through.
Yeah, I'll just jump in here. There's a couple of things that are coming into my mind. The first thing, Matt, you mentioned about the potential for the ESG to sort of run away. I think that was, the sort of phrase. And of course, we know that potentially this is massive. How long is a piece of string? Now, My answer, therefore, to some extent would be, look, this is going to run and run for years and years and years. So where do you start off to make it a manageable project? And I would then say, okay, let's look potentially at the legislation that is coming down the line for what is the first issue that is going to be required for reporting. Because that by definition gives you a starting point, and it gives you an automatic buy-in for everybody within the organization, because it has to be done in the same way that financial reporting has to be done. So I say, well, okay, let's look at the legislation, and the chances are that the legislation is going to be based around greenhouse gas emissions and the statutory reporting of that. So it seems sensible to me. And of course, just on that, if you look at the TCFD recommendations and the governance and strategy, the risk management, the metrics and targets, if you look at those 4 core pillars, if you get that reporting structure correctly for greenhouse gas emissions, that will then drop down into other sustainability issues naturally. And that's the way that, you know, the direction of travel, certainly for the ISSB, is going. So for me, I would say, look, in terms of giving you a strategic and important starting point, look at what's coming down the line legally or, you know, statutorily, you know what I mean? And that's the starting point. And then, of course, the education comes from us. Well, okay, greenhouse gas emissions. What do I need to know? Well, I think Kate mentioned inventory, the GHG inventory. That is a whole subject in its own right in terms of how an organisation determines what its inventory is, its organisational boundaries. So there's a lot there to begin with without necessarily thinking too far down the line. That's what I would say. And of course, once you then focus on that, you know, because greenhouse gas emissions are already being recorded, there's a massive amount of data, there's a massive amount of, I suppose, techniques, you know, out there for capturing that in line with the GHG protocol. So that's what I would say.
Something that came up for me as you were asking the question and just in the subsequent conversation is that what keeps rattling my head is make it everyone's job. Make disclosures around ESG and sustainability as important to the organization as your financial disclosures, and make it everyone's responsibility, right? So your CEO or you know, head of your business, executive director, should be bought into ESG reporting such that it constitutes one of the most important stakeholder engagement mechanisms and communication mechanisms your company has. Likewise, run it through the rest of the organization. When I was doing annual sustainability reporting, there was a meeting with the head of operations, and there was a meeting with the CFO, and there was a meeting with HR, because data has to come from all of these parts of the organization in order to fill out a holistic ESG report. So it doesn't, I guess one of the important things about this is not ghettoizing ESG information to one small team or one small director who's responsible for issuing the report. Rather, that person can act as a coordinator of information on behalf of the company that involves critical disclosures and critical data from multiple different teams and departments.
So I'm just going to jump in there as well, because I agree 100%, Kate, with what you're saying there. Because I mean, you know, experience would suggest if there are teams collecting data that they know is going to be used for a beneficial purpose, then they're more inclined to, you know, to want to be part of it and to see how the metrics changing over time and their input into those metrics changing is beneficial for, you know, them and the environment and the company and the primary users and et cetera, et cetera. So I think this is one of the wonderful things about this, which doesn't necessarily stack up all the time with financial reporting, I suppose. But again, just to add in, if I was looking at this, if I coming at this from a very, very cold position, governance, I've said it, the last two webinars, and I'm going to bang on it about it again, because it seems to me that you cannot do any of this without good governance, full stop. And if your governance is a little bit weak in whatever way, this is going to get you to focus on that. Because of governance, strategy, risk management, metrics and targets, it all comes back to good governance. So I see it as a sort of a very, very beneficial project. That it's not a 5-minute exercise, obviously, but there's a lot of benefit coming through it from all levels of the organisation. That I agree.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Maybe we've spoken a lot about what we should do, and I think there's some really good advice in there around getting everybody involved and getting everybody on board with what they need to do and making it everyone's job. I think is a fantastic line and thing to remember. Maybe if we come to you, Matt, what are some of the things we see, or some of the pitfalls we see people encountering, and then we can also maybe look at some of the ways that we avoid those.
Yeah, sure. And I've got a slide that we use with some clients just to kind of give them a bit of a view of what we see with the organizations we work with. So I'll just flash that up now, particularly around just that kind of common pitfalls. And Liam, I trust you can see that. If we were to narrow it down into a few areas, and I won't list all of these out, but I think we've touched on a couple of them around the multidisciplinary team, not considering that team enough and not considering how broad it needs to be. I think what we often see is a little bit of a ESG silo, and the ESG initiative not being as immersed in the wider organisation as maybe we've set the benchmark or discussed here today. I touched on the data and reporting strategy, so thinking about what does the organisation report more holistically. ESG also presents a bit of an opportunity for looking at the end-to-end reporting process. We see the financial reporting side more often than not, still kind of the ESG reporting side more often than not hitting with the same external reporting, financial reporting team are often responsible for it. So why not use it as an opportunity to actually look at reporting more holistically? The working day timetables for reporting are only going to become more difficult as a result. So link it to other initiatives and look to maybe use it as an excuse for budget for wider change. And then the other one I'd just touch on from this, and I think we see this probably more than maybe all of the others, is just doing nothing, where there are often conversations about it. We know it's something that's important. We know it's something that's coming down the road, but actually right now the priority is this, and then the priority is this, and then the priority is this. So I think Rob, you kind of touched on it, breaking your ESG journey down into steps that are milestone based, that aren't years out in the future, prioritized based on, as you said there, kind of based on statutory requirements first of all, but breaking it down into chunks and making sure you're actively doing something, whatever that something might be, and understanding that is really valuable. We've seen it with accounting standard changes where organizations leave it too late to deliver change effectively, to deliver solutions, and to not create a really burdensome outcome because they just don't think about it soon enough. So that would be one of the recommendations. And I'll just flip on kind of to the other half of that. A few things that we recommend to our clients. First of all, start to think about breaking the ESG down into work streams. Now, examples might be framework analysis, stakeholder management, technology, process, but think about segmenting ESG into individual work streams where there are maybe different people responsible, leveraging different skills in the organization. And I spoke about treating it like a project and aligning with the wider organization. We've spoken all the way through these webinars about training being key as well, making sure everyone does understand what ESG means. And I think one of the other challenges that maybe I didn't touch on before is organizations building enormous and quite complex and cumbersome ecosystems of highly bespoke code, basically highly bespoke data warehouses and solutions that then are really tough and complex to manage out into the future. We've seen that in the past with, again, accounting standards. So look at standard off the shelf but configurable, but standard off the shelf ESG solutions that can be those hubs for all of your ESG data, can be that hub for collaboration amongst the teams that need to report, and can then also start to kind of organize and streamline the reporting. There are some really good technologies and solutions out there, and that's kind of particularly our area of focus and my area of focus, thinking about that execution of ESG strategy. So I've said a lot there, Liam, and answered that question, and after very conveniently having the slides to hand. But yeah, keen, Kate, Rob, if there are any extra thoughts on top of any of those.
There's one thing that comes into my head as you're talking about this. And Matt, you talk about I know the business has had a lot of experience with IFRS 17 implementation systems, so very, very challenging counter standard. And the reason I mention this is I remember having doing a presentation to some Chinese insurers in China, and one of them came up to me afterwards and said, "Rob, I'm very, very concerned this is going to change our business model." And I said, "No, it's not going to change your business model. It's going to change how your business model is reported, but the business model is the business model." Now, I think how I see it slightly differently with ESG and this whole non-financial, if you like, reporting situation, and even the ISSB have sort of acknowledged this, is that if you think about the data that is going to be collected and reported and then actioned upon, we can see that certainly to begin with, for example, I'm going to report my emissions. Now, as a result of reporting my emissions, I am now going to be focused on reducing those emissions, because that's the whole point. So as a result of that, you could see, and it's not just greenhouse gas emissions, it's the areas of sustainability that we've talked about. You can see that there is that aspect of really seeing the risks and opportunities coming through. So you could see a change in strategy, business model, in the future as a result of what is being reported to begin with. So I think it's more, arguably you could say it's more live, it's more dynamic to changing strategies than a traditional financial reporting system or environment, for want of a better word.
Yeah, and I think to that point, it's rare that an accounting standard change would impact the operations team. They'll see it as something that finance looks after at the end. But ESG is different, I think, in that respect. It's not going to fundamentally change business models, but it's going to bring to the focus. Greenhouse gas emissions is probably the easiest to call upon. Things that previously were just not in focus, and that should, and this is the whole point, right? This should change behaviours. And we also talk about ESG reporting. I've spoken a lot about what I'd call actual reporting, but actually there's the element of target setting and looking forwards, and this is where we're at now, but our ambition is to get here. And I think there's as much investment that needs to happen in how you track and monitor, how you, in essence, how you do your budgeting and forecasting, not just on financials, but also how you start to budget and forecast stats around ESG as well.
Just looking at this question.
Yeah, there's some really great questions coming in that I wanted to just kind of weave into this conversation at this point, because I think a couple of you are hitting on an interesting point. Both John and Raghavan asked this question around, if you're not required, should you start reporting anyway? And Raghavan hits on, well, if some of your reporting may reflect negatively on your company or your brand, is it wise to do so anyway? And I would argue vehemently that the answer is yes, and I'll tell you why. What gets measured gets managed, and investors know that. So when you start electing voluntarily to disclose information on your company that sets up the scenario for you to progress toward improvement over time, that is showing a maturity and frankly, an investability of your asset that is far more rigorous than a company that just decides we're not going to start because it's not required of us yet. I mean, think about when you are assessing for yourself an investment with A or with B, and A has decided to voluntarily disclose additional information on its operations, and B has not. I mean, at the end of the day, when making financial decisions, you need as much material information as possible. So if you end up being the company or the fund that elects to report this information ahead of time before you're required, and in a way that sets up a scenario of progress over time, you're going to put yourself in better company, you're going to put yourself on better footing, and you're going to enable a more mature conversation with your stakeholders and other investors around who your company is and who it wants to become over time. Rather, avoiding doing it because it's not required of you yet, or because some of the metrics might not reflect well on the company, is, I think, a short-sighted view of how you want to engage and how transparent you want to be as a company in the long run.
Yeah, I agree. I just would like to add a point in there, a couple of points. With relation to that, again, Deloitte have just issued a paper which is saying that over the last year, 1,000 pages of documentation have been issued to do with ESG reporting it in all its forms. So we know that it is coming down the line from a legislative viewpoint. Now, in terms of getting ready for that, if you're not having to do the reporting now, but you know that at some point, whether it's the ISSB is sort of mooting 2024 for some basic reporting, it's never early enough to start the preparation for that and doing dry runs and learning how to capture the data. So I think it's never too soon, even if the reports are not actually produced to begin with. And the other thing is, remember that, things are only as good as the auditing that's carried out of that. And if you go back to situations we've had in the past where sustainability reports have been issued and they are arguably more like PR exercises, well, that invariably, that has to go. So whether it's limited assurance or whether it's a greater level of assurance of the reports that are produced and the metrics and the disclosures that go with that, by definition, there is going to be a greater safeguard, a greater comparability, greater significance placed upon the sustainability reporting. So, again, it's like we need to start preparing for this now. And one final thing, Raghavan's point about the company will now change the strategy to safeguard the environment. I agree with that, but my point is more to do with if there is a focus. Kate was saying, if it gets measured, it gets managed. If there's a focus on a metric, then whether it's for regulatory risk, reputational risk, competitive advantage, then a company will naturally want to seek to take advantage of the future. And so that's my point about possibly changing the way they act because of, trying to reduce scope 3 emissions, for example. That's it.
Excellent. I think maybe just to change this to something slightly different. We've one very good question. And I suppose it comes from the idea of progressing past educating ourselves about ESG and actually making this real, thinking about data capture, thinking about reporting, etc., and getting started. And someone has asked, what sort of tools or softwares are used to visualize the impact of an ESG decision? Mostly environmental, so maybe they're putting a slightly environmental spin on what they're talking about there, but basically, what are the options that you have? And I think, Matt, you've mentioned some of them already, and maybe some to avoid, but what are the multitude of options you have from a tools and software perspective to visualize the impact of an ESG decision?
So there's a pretty broad range, so I won't kind of list out solutions. I think the first thing is, what is the objective? So if it's about visualizing, if the question is about visualizing, then maybe the focus would be some form of BI analytics tool. And a lot of organizations leverage lots of BI tools like Power BI, Tableau. That's if you've got, I guess, all the data together in the first place, ready to perform that analytics on. I think most of the organizations that we see aren't really at that stage. So that's just if it's visualization analytics. Then there are loads of great BI tools that can help you visualize and gain insight to that. Then the other route is actually organizing the data in the first place. So if you're just thinking about data, we see a lot of organizations building Azure data lakes now in order to pull data together and using, and it doesn't need to be Microsoft. There are loads of other solution providers out there that will provide tool kits to bring all the data together. Now, I guess where I see the greatest opportunity to improve, though, is if you look in the more, and this is where we do probably most of our work, in the more business owned solutions. So not a technical data warehouse, not just a visualization tool, but somewhere where you can bring the data together, do the visualization, and it's got ESG toolkits built in. And there are solutions we work with like CCH Tagetic, for example, which is, I guess, that middle ground between it's a hub for your data. It's got reporting tools, and it can be owned by the business, and it isn't as technical as an IT based solution. So it really depends is the short answer. But I guess if you're on the webinar today and you're at a stage and you're not sure which category you fit into, and you want to dive more into what are the solution options, then really happy to have a follow-up conversation and dive in a little bit more detail than that fairly broad answer.
Brilliant. And then from Rob and Kate, I guess, from a more, I guess, ESG focused perspective, what are some of the recommendations you'd have around people choosing and kind of committing to a path around tooling and technology?
At this stage, because we know ISSB is pulling so much from SASB and from TCFD, as I said, I think that we're wise, and this is a question we're all facing, right? Where to put our time and energy as far as what we study and what we learn about and what we engage with actively and gain expertise in order to be useful in the future, right? This is a question that we're all asking ourselves in some way. So I think for myself, as I think about the future, I'm still doing a lot of work around GRI because a lot of companies are still doing GRI reporting, but I'm focusing a great deal of time and energy on SASB and TCFD because I know that those two tools are being pulled into this forthcoming guidance around ESG reporting. So those are, for me, kind of key pieces of it. And I liked Matt's, discussion of BI tools, Tableau, other types of kind of visualizing tools. I've had great luck in the past engaging sort of veteran graphic designers who are able to take some of this information, which on, words on a page can feel a bit dry, and add it into some kind of infographic. I think it's really important to do that, especially with environmental and social data, because otherwise it's less memorable, right? We remember photos, we remember images far better than we remember words on a page. So there's something to be said for quantifying greenhouse gases or water usage or waste usage or people employed in some kind of infographic when you're doing this reporting, rather than just reporting it in a way that's purely narrative. There's a real power in that, and I'm finding that when we do ESG reporting that involves more infographics and more images, that it's more memorable, more attractive, and more fun to read.
I think that's a really, really excellent point. Okay, great. So maybe just with 4 minutes remaining, I think we probably have time for one more question. And maybe if we try to combine the things we've spoken about today, making it real, etc., and some of the things we've learned on the other webinars, if we could really nicely bookend the series, and maybe we could come to each of you for a sentence, but when people look to, leave the webinar today and go back to their day-to-day work, what are some of the things that they can take away from this webinar series that they can start to apply, and on the whole theme of getting started and actually doing something, maybe from each of you in your own specific areas of expertise? What do you think they should do, or what's that kind of one sentence, one tip that they can actually get started on today?
Ladies first.
The other day, I was listening to a speaker who was talking about the value of personal challenge disclosure. There's something important that goes on with human beings in particular when we share with one another our efforts and our failures. And I think I found over the years that early on in your career, you're trying to look really good, right? You're trying to wow people. You're trying to impress everyone. You're trying to show that you know what to do and sort of create a really positive impression. But over time, what you realize is that we identify with one another and we find common ground when we share our failures and our challenges and our missteps, far more than when we share our great triumphs. And I think the same principle can be used when we think about company disclosure and about ESG reporting, that we can find common ground with other companies and with other reporters and other professionals in this field when we are more transparent about that which we've tried, that which has failed, how we pivoted and reiterated, and how we went at it again. That's a much more generative conversation to have and a much more compelling disclosure to engage in. So I think that's one of the things I would kind of part with is get started where you are. Be okay with failing, be okay with stumbling along the way, because getting started and showing progress over time is what's really going to engender trust and start interesting conversations with investors and partners and customers, far more compellingly than perfection or wowing people with your various achievements. So that's part of it. And the other thing I would say is that all of the tools you need are out there. We've shown you several. I know Peter has been putting links to many of the tools mentioned today. It's out there. Guidance is readily available, and we are here to support you. Thank you.
Fantastic. Rob, Matt, anything to add on that point?
Well, I would say a slightly different angle, but I would say find out where your reporting base is. Who do you report under? Is it the EU? Is it the SEC? Is it a country that adopts IFRS or is capable of adopting ISSB standards? That's the most important thing from my perspective, because that's what's coming down the line. And then, for example, in for the ISSB, look at something, read something like the basis of conclusion for their first exposure draft, because you'll get an understanding of why this is happening, okay, and what's the objective of the reporting. So find out where your reporting base is, read some documentation that's coming from that base, and then look at some of the big corporates that are already providing very, very well regarded sustainability reports, to see the metrics that they've captured, to see how those metrics have changed over time, to see the value coming from those metrics. That's what I would do.
And to round it off really quickly in 10 seconds, going forwards to implementation, I would say use ESG as an opportunity to enhance and look at reporting more holistically. There'll be nice budgets assigned, so think as holistically as possible and start thinking about the data and everything you need in order to report now and not later.
Agreed, for sure.
Fantastic. I think that takes us right to the end. Thank you very much to everyone who's attended today, and also if you've attended any of the previous webinars. You can see lots of familiar names and who've attended all three, so thank you very much. There are a good few questions coming in about how you actually get started working on ESG, etc. From a training enablement perspective, IA seminars are your go-to people for any questions, queries about how they offer training. And you're more than welcome to reach out to ourselves at Vantage Point as well, from a technology perspective, or to answer any of the broad questions you've had around technology, visualization, and data. So please reach out to either group and we'd be happy to help. For today, we'll park this series here, but we will be back in touch very soon with more content, etc. Thank you very much for your time today. Look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.